This is January 16, 1991, recording an interview with Sam Berman.
17.
17. Correction. My boss says the 17th.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Right.
I hope the rest of the interview goes better. I don't even know what day it is. All right, Sam, it's a pleasure to be able to interview for the Archives of Social Welfare Department of USC. And as you see, the first question is, have you been the subject of other interviews on the same or related subjects?
Not that I can recall, sure.
Tell me something about what led you into social work. What made you become a social worker?
Actually, I wanted to be a history teacher.
A street teacher?
A history teacher.
History.
Because I was interested in people, in history, economics, and the like. And then during my college years, turned out there were very few opportunities to become a history teacher because it was in the midst of the Depression. And I'd been taking some sociology and psychology courses. I think Harry M. Schulman inspired more of us at City College of New York to become social workers than anybody else on that faculty. Through him, I got an assignment at the Stuyvesant Neighborhood House as a group leader, volunteer, and from there it took off. I found my niche in life, and that was the beginning.
What year was that?
That must have been 1941. Yeah.
Have you been sorry about that decision?
No, I was so glad. It was really a revelation. I hadn't known about social work at all. It was an unknown field. He was a really inspiring teacher. He was very experienced in social welfare, and the opportunity to do direct service was very meaningful.
Was that a paid job?
No, it was a volunteer.
Volunteer.
No, then I got a paid job at the 92nd Street Y as a group leader. Then, because we were by then in the war, and I wanted to get my parents prepared for my absence, I went away for one summer as a camp counselor at a camp for disturbed kids. And the following summer was graduated, and I had been in the enlisted reserves, so I was called up right after graduation. When I came out, thanks to the GI Bill, I was able to go to graduate school.
Oh.
But first I worked for the Department of Welfare in the city of New York, which was a most interesting, challenging experience, and made me want to go to graduate school all the more, so I'd know what I was doing.
When you were in the Army, did you have any social work content to what you were doing?
Not really, no. I had applied. I laughed because I got reprimanded for it. I had gone to on my own, to a unit that trained illiterates. It was a training program in literacy and in adaptation, and I indicated that I thought I was qualified to work with those people or would like to, and I was told I hadn't gone through channels. Although the officer told me he thought I might be well qualified, I had not done it properly, and I had to go back to my regular duties. Then I had an interesting experience. I became an officer in the military police of all things, and my style of management was such that I was known as Lieutenant Sam. But I didn't have any social service role.
So they saw your management skills even then?
It was a facilitating role. I wasn't in a situation that required strict discipline or anything like that. So it was all right. It worked out. Now, I'd wanted to apply for the Officer Candidate School in Hospital Administration, but that was a very hard one to get into. And the major advised me to pick a school that was easy to get into. I got the military police.
I can't see you as an MP.
I was in charge of the Japanese mail at the Enemy Prisoner of War Information Bureau.
Oh.
The whole mail system. And my charge.
Where were you stationed?
That was at Fort Meade, Maryland. We had the records of any prisoner of war the United States had in any of its camps, and were responsible for maintaining the records and the transmission of mail and updating the files. It was not a very life-threatening situation. That was at the tail end of my stay.
Were you overseas?
Yes. The Army taught me Italian and then sent me to the Pacific.
That's just like the Army.
Yeah, it was a strange one.
In your experiences at the Welfare Department of the City of New York, what was outstanding?
I had a person as supervisor, Catherine Murphy, I'll never forget, who taught me, and I guess others, how to take a face sheet of a case record and from that alone get a feeling for the family, what it was going through. One of the most dynamic teachers I ever had. She taught me how to distinguish, to be objective, how to learn what the needs were, how to respond to them. A very sensitive, strong supervisor with whom I had wonderful discussions. She was the one who encouraged me to go to graduate school, and was just a fine person from whom to learn what people needed and how to maintain their dignity and get them some help. It was a very good experience and tough. I had Bedford-Stuyvesant as my caseload. And I still remember Marion, Chauncey, and Hull Streets. It was quite a... And the people I met were fascinating.
Do you think it's tougher now?
Much more so, yes. It was tough in those days. That neighborhood had been condemned before the war. The housing was supposed to have been torn down. Because of the shortage, people were living there in most difficult circumstances. And very trying times. But you did the best you could under those circumstances.
What year was that?
That I worked there from 46 when I got out of service till 47. And I went to graduate school at night at New York School of Social Work until I was accepted at Washington University in St. Louis full-time. George Warren Brown School of Social Work.
What years was that?
I was there from 47 till January of 49. And in January I went, I completed my work and my dissertation and went to Topeka, Kansas as a psychiatric social worker.
What was your sequence? Was it psychiatric?
Psychiatric. Psychiatric and child welfare.
And where did you work in Topeka, Kansas?
Winter VA Hospital, which was Menninger directed at the time.
Winter
VA
And how long was that?
Hospital. That was about a year and a half. Oh, before that, I had some interesting experiences at graduate school. I'm going to digress and tell you about it. I was very active at graduate school. It was a experience where I felt I had better preparation than many of my colleagues because I'd been out in the field, both in the settlement house and at the Department of Welfare. So I had a very fine time. I had very interesting fieldwork placements. I was the only male social worker at the Red Cross Vocational Counseling Service. I worked at the Bliss Psychopathic Institute, which was the name of the hospital, the mental hospital in St. Louis. And I had a one-year fieldwork placement at the Forest Park Children's Center. During my student days between semesters, for 1 month, I was the acting executive director of the Forest Park Children's Center. And I was active in student affairs. I was chairman of the Social Action Club, and then I was president of the Social Work Club for a year. So it was those are very nice days for me. I enjoyed that tremendously. And that was St. Louis, a city I enjoyed very much. And then after Winter VA Hospital, while I was there, I was invited by the executive director of Forest Park Children's Center to apply to be his successor. And although I'd had relatively little direct service experience, I moved very quickly into the director of administrator. But in that agency, I wore all kinds of hats. I was the social worker, the supervisor, the executive director, the substitute child care worker, whatever was needed.
How large an agency is it?
That we had 12 children. It was a pioneer residential treatment center, one of the first dozen or so in the country. It was started by the Junior League of St. Louis in 1945, and I came along in 49 as the director. I was either the third or the fourth director of the agency.
Don't they usually just start programs and then
Yes.
withdraw?
They stayed with us for, I think it was a total of 9 years. At any rate, I wrote an article for them when they won the Boretz Award, D-O-R-E-T-Z. And I wrote an article for the Child Welfare Journal called Some Lessons Learned in Developing Residential Treatment Centers, in which I thanked them for their continued sponsorship. The problem we had was getting ongoing financing, so they were good enough to stay with us. It was the only time up to that time that they ever stayed with a project. Normally it was 3 years and they'd spin it off.
Who finally took over the funding?
The United Way of St. Louis. Now, plus, when the agency applied to the United Way, it said, well, before we can admit you, we have to have a survey of all of the institutions in St. Louis. So they studied all 21 agencies. The result was then a merger of some and the closing of others. When I left St. Louis in, I have to figure out what year it was now, I left there in 53. The original 21 agencies are now 16. 4 years later, I came back to St. Louis to head up the merged agency of Forest Park Children's Center and Edgewood Children's Center. And more consolidations took place after that.
You like St. Louis?
I love St. Louis. All told, we lived there about 11 years. So. There, at Edgewood, we diversified the program so that from the initial residential treatment center, it became we had group homes, an outpatient treatment service, and some minimal placement. And we had a school on grounds. During that time, I became chairman of the Council of Agency Executives. I think we were called superintendents in those days. I did quite a bit of outside consultation, lots of workshops and institutes, and I was teaching at the child care training courses at St. Louis University School of Social Work. And that was
It was a lot to do.
That was a very good experience. sort of a medium-sized agency.
How large an agency was this medium?
As I remember, I think we had 24 children in residence, 6 more in the group home, and I don't remember how many outpatients. Not very many. It was a beginning program. But we were doing group therapy, individual, conjoint interviews, parent-child therapy. It was a very good program. It was a member of the Child Welfare League of America, naturally, and it was the sort of the lead agency in the treatment field in St. Louis.
What was the most exciting thing in St. Louis that you can remember?
The birth of my daughter, Judy. No, it felt like home. It was where I went to graduate school. It was after living in New York, it had a different pace of life. It was pleasant. Professionally, there was so much to do. It was an active community. I was very involved with NASW in those days, and actually not NASW, but its predecessor. I belonged to the AAPSW, American Association of Psychiatric Social Workers, and the AASW, American Association of Social Workers. Then in those days we had TIAC. When they tried to combine them, they did there was an interim period when they were beginning to blend before they became NASW. And I was vice president of NASW and program chair. Oh, one of the things I remember was being a program chair, as you've been, for the Child Welfare Regional Conference, Southwest region. That was a good experience. I liked the interrelationship of the private and the public agencies. It was a very good, close working partnership one with the other. It was as cooperative an arrangement as I ever encountered any place. It was a very good learning experience. Also, by then, I was very much involved nationally, and I was doing some writing. I was kind of reaching a peak at that point. Then I had other peaks after that.
And you left St. Louis when?
I was there in 57. In 1963, Joe Reed invited me to join the staff of the Child Welfare League of America. And that was, professionally, it was a great honor. And he wanted me to come on as director of surveys. And I declined, saying I prefer getting some more direct experience as a consultant. So I served for years group care consultant, and the next year moved into the job as director of surveys.
Let's stop for a second. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a Chicago period too?
Yeah, let me retrace for you. I was director of Forest Park Children's Center in St. Louis till 1953. Then I went to Ridge Farm, which was a residential treatment center in Lake Forest, about 30 miles north of Chicago. It had been a preventorium, a converted preventorium. And there I took over a residential treatment center that was in some difficulty. Experiences there included working with Dr. Irene Jocelyn and Dr. Harold Balikoff as prime consultants, and a marvelous staff, key core staff. During that time, I got involved with and was one of the founding members of the American Association of Children's Residential Centers, sometimes referred to as Bettelheim's Club, but actually a group of executive directors of residential treatment centers. that was in, I think, 1955 or so, 54, probably. And after being treasurer, I was president of that outfit and maintained an interest in the group for many years thereafter. My interest, meanwhile, had gone beyond residential treatment. I wanted to diversify, and St. Louis gave me that opportunity. I went there in 57. Now we're up to 63.
63. We're in New York.
And I went
again?
to New York, and I stayed there for 10 years.
Can we digress a minute
Sure.
or two? Do you want to comment about Dr. Bettelheim?
Oh, Bruno Bettelheim was the one of the founders of that group, along with Dr. Edward Greenwood of Topeka, Kansas, Fritz Radel of Wayne University. I think Fritz Mayer was in on that group as well. Dr. Franklin Robinson of Pittsburgh, and of just a few others. A couple of others. At any rate, I was honored to be accepted into the group just as it was beginning to form. We used to meet in Chicago across the Parkway, the Midway, from the Orthogenic School. Bettelheim was a very gracious host. It was a delightful experience to sit in a large living room and have the 7 or 8 or 10 of us talk amongst ourselves about clinical issues in residential treatment. To see Fritz Radel in action was worth anything one could give. Bettelheim always wanted the group to stay small and selective, and each year we had to find ways to increase the membership without upsetting him. And he had an absolute cutoff point of 50 members, because if we went beyond that, he claimed, we wouldn't be able to maintain the intimacy and the purity of our scientific discussions. But we actually went way beyond that eventually. I didn't have that many interactions with Bruno, but in the 80s, when I was in Los Angeles, which is a later chapter, we resumed our relationship, and I can mention when I came here, when I was director of Rice Davis Child Study Center, Bruno Bettelheim, having moved to California, approached about the possibility of becoming a consultant and trainer, and we're more than happy to welcome him. And that was a rewarding reunion at that stage, and a very cordial.
Interesting how the wheel turns, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
was
starts
surprising,
in one spot
right?
and ends up someplace else.
No, it was interesting because he was very controversial. He was always fascinating when he analyzed material presented to us. He was a great teacher, very opinionated, as everybody knows. And some of us were very much in opposition to some of his views, particularly his exclusion of parents from the treatment process. Many of us felt just in contrast that you had to involve parents. Also, he clung to the psychoanalytic model, and the rest of us felt that we had to get much more reality-oriented. He did know how to establish a climate, and he gave us that in spades. He really helped understand what his process was. It was a good learning experience.
So he was a highlight in your developing career.
He was the one in that group that was much more my model and mentor was Fritz Mayer of Belfair. Fritz was always one of the people I looked up to as the most sincere, knowledgeable, kind, strong, gentle, whatever you think of, scholarly, humorous, sweet people. And I worked with him off and on over the years in various projects. And he was a special friend. Many of us felt that way about him. Great guy.
Now let's go to New York.
And he almost convinced me to go to Belfair instead of here.
Oh.
New York. Well, 1963, when I went to the League, it was sort of a crowning glory on a career. It was an opportunity to work with some of the most accomplished people in the field of child welfare. One of my role models in social work had been Helen Hagen, who had been the Assistant Executive Director of the Child Welfare League of America, and with whom I'd worked off and on in various ways over the years. Well, I was awed when I was offered the position of Assistant Executive Director of the Child Welfare League. And here I was following in her footsteps, and that was as rewarding an offer as I'd ever had. That was like being welcomed into a select club. And I'd earned it in that I had been the director of surveys in a department that grew and was very successful. And then Joe Reed had asked me to head up a national project. It was a manpower development anti-poverty program for the training of unemployed persons as child care workers, daycare workers. I had to write the project proposal and submit it and negotiate it with Washington and then administer it. And it was for originally a year and a half, and then I got a second, and that was unusual. I got a second year and a half. So for 3 years, I was director of that project, which we ran in 10 different cities across the country.
Was Los Angeles one?
Yes, as I recall it was. And it was, I know, I remember now. We had to get one city from almost each of the federal regions for a variety of reasons. And from that, I then was invited to be assistant executive director. So that was my New York activity. I was back home for a while.
Do you think that project would have any usefulness today with the homeless?
Yes. We found some startling things. The number of people who couldn't hold jobs because they couldn't read, whose schooling had been very inadequate, who had become extremely dependent on governmental help, who had lost their sense of ability to strive on their own, who got an uplift just from the possibility of employment. But that had to be coupled with actual job placements, otherwise it fell apart. Terrible problems with health and housing, child care. It was we try to run it so that each community designed its own locality-oriented program. And in some cities we had very good success, in others it was marginal. But I think it could apply. It was a demonstration project, and it's difficult to talk about because I don't know how heavily invested the government really was in following through. It was during the Lyndon Johnson efforts, and if there had been some more continuity, it would have been much more meaningful. There was much as we wanted to have follow-up to see what happened with those who worked in the program, there was a limited amount of research, and then funds were gone, and there was no possibility of doing it on our own. But the model was very good. That I enjoyed. it was an interesting administrative challenge to run something on that diversified a basis.
It just intrigues me that it could possibly be updated.
Oh, it
for
could
now.
be. It could be. You know, it served the interesting purpose of getting people who needed jobs and needed daycare to become daycare workers and to have their children taken care of by graduates of the program. So it was for daycare and institutional, any kind of child care worker.
How long were you assistant director of child welfare?
6 years.
From 19...
I left there
63?
at the end of 72. So, I guess from
67?
67, 72, yeah, something like that.
And you left there to come here?
I left there. I had to make a career choice. The league had gone through a very difficult period of examining the possibility of merger with Family Service Association of America. It temporarily debilitated the league. Quite a few staff left because they weren't sure about their job security. Member agencies were disenchanted with both nationals because nothing was happening. And anyway, it ended up as not being a doable. And we were then beginning to rebuild. But by that time, I was age 50. And I had to make a career decision. I could have stayed on at the league. Or since I always wanted to go back to direct service, I thought, well, this was the time to become director of a local agency. And so I started to look and made the decision to come out to sunny California to an agency that needed me.
For us. That was the year after you did the study of our agency.
No, 4 years before that, I had been called in as a consultant because of some difficulties in the agency and some consideration of a long-range plan. And I had gotten to know the agency somewhat and was called upon periodically after that for some telephone contact. I'd made 2 field visits to the agency and did not intend to get involved any further with it if I could
help
it. And then I got the invitation to apply.
What was the most exciting experience you had with the Child Welfare League?
It's hard to say. It was all exciting. It was the most, for me, it was the most charged atmosphere intellectually in terms of the kind of interactions we had as a staff, the ideas, the level of experience and knowledge of those people, the working with agencies, the going all over the country and Canada, interacting, learning wherever I could, and just broadening my vision. I had come in basically as a group care person. I very soon thereafter learned about foster care and adoption and maternity home care and protective services. I mean, you name it, we were doing that kind of material. Got very involved with research, publications, conferences, and I'd become the sort of the inside administrator. Joe Reed, who's from all the admiration in the world. He is a remarkable man. Joe was mostly the outside executive, remarkably talented, and I was doing much of the inside work. And I worked closely with Zelma Felton, Buzz Felton, who was the director of field service. So it was just a marvelous experience. But the time had come to move on. So,
what was the most frustrating part of Child Welfare?
I think that the years we spent looking at the possibility of a merger that really stopped us from doing other work. It was at first it was largely a self-study involving a great deal of energy and effort. I'd been involved in merger studies as a consultant, and I'd run a merged agency, but that was a time when things just ground to a bad halt, and that was frustrating.
Why did they think of the merger originally? What was the reason?
Family Service Association had some serious questions about where it was going as an agency. Their lease was expiring in the building which we co-occupied on 23rd Street. Their executive was fairly close to retirement. And so they decided they ought to look at where they're going. And they had a study done. And one part of the study is an almost innocent reference to, and they ought to look into the possibility of merger with other nationals. And so they came to the Child Welfare League and said, "You're another national, can we merge with you?" We looked at it closely, and to his credit, Joe Reed, at the very beginning said, the first question we ought to answer is it fiscally feasible to do this? Well, we went through 4 years of study of one kind or another, and at the very end came down to the question, well, if we were to do this, can we finance it? The answer was no, we can't. And that was the end of that.
It's interesting that this is applicable to some of the things that are going on in business now, too.
Right. It was they had some idea that by combining it would be more economical, that we'd avoid duplication of effort and so on. We very quickly found some major differences in philosophy, differences in style and organization. And although it could have been done, it really would not have advanced the fields. So it was abandoned after a while. That was frustrating.
In light of what's happened in social work since, do you see it as a possibility in the future?
Not now, no. After a while, Family Service Association reorganized, made some major internal changes, and is probably stronger now than it ever had been. So they don't need the merger. Child Welfare League did the same thing, and after a difficult time, emerged with a new approach, new executive, and it seems to be rolling in high gear. In the meantime, both agencies gave up a critically important function, that of accreditation, to the Council on Accreditation of Services to Children and Families. And so they've given up a key part of their operation, and now they do other things. They're much more involved in advocacy, and they've changed the nature of their consultation to a different field.
Want to comment on that? Do you think that the Council on Accreditation is a valid change from the two?
Actually, after I left the League, I'd been on the Council of Agency Executives, an advisory council to the League. Then I was put on the board of directors of the League, and one of my assignments was to serve on the original board of the Council of Agency Council of Accreditation. The intent was excellent, that if they could qualify agencies as meeting the high standards, that they get third-party payments. Well, it hasn't worked out that way for many agencies. So that even now, agencies such as the ones I was connected with have looked toward the Council on Accreditation of Hospitals instead, because that's where third-party payments would come in. And that's regrettable that it's had to be that way. That's a problem with getting insurance, third-party payers to come through. Now, I thought that the accreditation process of the League was an important one. It was unfortunate that it could not lead to financial help for the agencies. But the League, through its legislative efforts, certainly has brought in a lot of funding for agencies. The other one been concerned about. The council does its accreditation through peer reviewers, whereas the league's accreditation and that of the family service had been through staff consultants. And there's always a feeling, well, is accreditation strictly checking off whether agencies meet standards, or should it be a consultation service, a combination? I have my thoughts on the relative values of the two approaches.
Well, taking that into the hospital accreditation, they use peer reviewers.
Yes, I know.
Instead of
Right.
staff.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that they have staff do it, or do you like the peer review?
I preferred the staff one. I know from an economic standpoint, it's more feasible to use peer reviewers. It's not as expensive a process. It gets more people involved in the looking at whether standards are being met. There's something about being a trained consultant that involves a great deal of skill, the acquisition of experiences, transmission of knowledge, and continuity, so that if you have an agency that you work with over a period of years, you develop a relationship, a knowledge of it, and it can help it toward some future goals. The other way is more of a checklist kind of thing.
You have a standard, too, with
Right.
one person doing it.
Right. There are arguments on both sides. But, you get over-identified with the agency you're consulting with, that you lose your objectivity, that kind of thing could happen.
Well, couldn't it be a consultant's responsibility, but not necessarily the consultant who is assigned to your agency?
Yes. Yeah, but the system is working, and working well, apparently. So, and part of my feeling may have been a resistance to change. That's not
resistance to change. What's that?
But yes, there could very well have been
Never
that.
heard of that.
Right.
Well, shall we stop for a moment?
Okay.
Let's see, where are we? Pause. Oh. Okay, Sam, now we have to bring you into California.
California. You're gonna... Okay, I'm in California, 1963. No, 1973.
1973, yeah.
Right, yeah. 63 was New York, 73 St. Louis. Okay. January of 73, I came to...
January 22nd.
Yeah, is that it? To Vista Del Mar Child Care Service, which proved to be a very exciting agency. It was I'd known about the agency over the years, largely through the Child Welfare League case record exhibit, and the reputation of Joe Bonaparte as the dean of Los Angeles area child welfare executives, and Marina Applebaum, with whom I'd been on a program at the National Conference of Social Welfare some years before, and Reuben Panner, and it's before I met Charlotte Langley. I'd been a consultant to the agency, and I knew some of the quality of service of the agency, some of the problems it had been experiencing. And I knowingly entered the fray because I like to involve myself in reparative work. And that's very serious. For some reason, I always liked to go to a situation that had trouble so that I could help do some problem solving. It was the challenge I liked. After a while, I wasn't sure I could meet the challenge, but I persisted. It worked quite well. The agency I think that what was exciting about it was there was an opportunity, if things worked well, to be creative, to take a core of a staff who were very solid, with many years of experience, and with the addition of some newcomers, and a board that was eager to make some changes and to build something. And I had come in with a sort of a goal to intensify and diversify. And circumstances worked out quite well. We were able to intensify the residential treatment component and to build up the other services. So it became a truly multi-service agency with lots of potential. I encountered problems I'd never experienced before. It was for me, it was a particularly crucial kind of situation in that I had been out of direct service for 10 years and had wondered whether I could do the job. So it was a very meaningful struggle for a while. I had, after the initial great thrust, things were really rolling, had a near grind to a halt situation due to a union problem that had to be resolved that tore the agency apart and me. And I also had to deal with some unusual, delicate thing to say, role clarification issues. Well,
the unusual.
Since where is this material going, by the way?
It goes into the archives.
Well, then let me, for future references, deal with it openly. Around the end of my first year, I was feeling at a crossroads that I was quite sure I could manage the agency part of it. I wasn't sure I could manage the board part because of the unusual strength of the, at that point, friendly antagonist, the board president. Powerful man who had definite ideas about how things should go, which meant only his way. And so I did, without telling staff my dilemma and sharing only with my wife, I decided that my integrity as a professional was more important than my job. And that unless I could clarify it, even though it would be a great risk to myself, because I didn't know where I'd go at that point, I thought I'd have to have a confrontation with the president. I dealt with it in a very honest, open fashion, without detracting from his dignity. I accepted, I developed a way of making it appear that perhaps I had disappointed him in his expectations of me as an executive, because otherwise there was no reason for him to have immersed himself in what should have been an administrator's function rather than his. And ended up with his apologizing for something he hadn't realized. And we worked out at that point a much clearer definition of who was responsible for what. Over the years, of course, he violated that periodically, and each time I would assert my responsibility. I was reflecting today, for example, on how about 2 years or so before my retirement, he once again involved himself in a way that would have been, in the long run, disastrous for agency relations. During my absence, he had hired a key person on staff, naming the salary and the position. On my return from vacation, I fired the individual and faced the president with the inappropriateness of his action, and we worked out an understanding which persisted to and beyond my stay at the agency as executive. I thought there was something valuable to learn as an administrator back at the end of that first year that if I had not done that, I don't know what would have happened subsequently. But instead, we worked out a very harmonious relationship, which involved a great deal of affection, mutual respect, admiration, and a lot of shouting. But maintaining throughout a sense of purpose and direction, and it was, all in all, a rather happy experience. But had I not done that, it would have been a disaster.
Have you ever thought of writing something about executive director and board president relationship?
Yes, it was funny. I had one of the, you'd asked this material asking about frustrations. When I was in St. Louis, I had the luxury of being on top of my job and having time and energy to do workshops and institutes and to write papers. And I could not recapture that later on. When I was at the League, the pace was too hectic. When I was director of Vista, there was just not the drive. I don't know what had changed. I thought about it. I wrote many things as I went along, but I never wrote papers again. It was as though, unless I had an assignment, like a workshop where I had to deliver a paper, I didn't do that kind of thing. I thought a great deal about some of the experiences I had. I used them when I did workshops, but I never formalized it in writing. The other one is, I think some of it is not teachable. I think much of what I did was idiosyncratic in that it was my style, which is at times to be hard, at times soft, at times to be very assertive, and other times to be very accommodating. And I don't know that it applies to others. I don't know, for example, whether anybody could have worked with my board president as I did. I don't know if I did it as well as possible, but I know it worked. It was effective. And I don't know if it's teachable. I think it's part of how you develop relationships, how clear you are on your concepts. There's some things I know I didn't do well, that I've reflected on, but that's me. I couldn't do it differently if I tried. Maybe I could, but I won't try. But I never could formalize. Now, part of that, by the way, was also from learning from others. For example, I used to love to read doctoral dissertations. Strange thing to admit, but I remember when I was at the Child Welfare League of America, the director of publications was Dr. Elizabeth Glover. And Liz had told me, when I asked her what her dissertation was about, that it had to do with executive board crises. And I'd read it way back in 63 or 64, someplace back then. And I remember the nub of it, which was, unless there was role clarity, unless the executive fought for what he believed in, he or she would lose his or her job. That in a crisis, probably would lose it anyway, but that there was a possibility of retaining it if you went to bat for yourself. So I took that to heart. As a consultant, I always used that kind of approach with executives I was trying to help. For myself, it was really an issue of what do I believe in and how strongly. And I was brought up not to take a lot of guff, so I didn't do that. Also, I had experiences with board members from which I learned, so that although this was the most difficult of relationships for a variety of reasons, it was also the most productive. I think I gained and the agency gained more from the manner in which I worked with the president than would have been possible had I been, had I worked any other way. I still feel that way. It was difficult, but it was successful.
It sounds as if this particular issue could have been the most difficult part of your career here at Vista.
It was.
As well as the most gratifying because of the way it worked out.
But it developed a a friendship, a working relation, one of mutual respect. It tied in also, and I have to add it because it was significant. The president was the most productive fundraiser I've ever encountered anyplace. He was also one of the brightest people I've ever met. He has more smarts. His intuitive understanding of situations is remarkable. He really had grasp of things beyond the scope of many other people around, except when he was terribly wrong or obstinate. When we dealt with one another, it was on a cooperative basis. But he was a domineering man. That's how he made his way in life. He was a self-made man. When he was berating people, he would do it publicly without regard for their feelings. Very demeaning, although he's really one of the kindest people I know. One day he was lashing one of my colleagues mercilessly, a man who allowed himself to be abused because he got rewarding benefits for taking beatings. So the worst example of a sadomasochistic cycle I'd seen in practice in an agency. And in his anger, the board president turned on me and began to shout at me. And I just gently reached over and tapped him on the forearm and said, "We don't talk to each other that way." And he never raised his voice at me again. Now that was a way of saying, we're really peers, we're colleagues, we're friends, and this doesn't go. There are a lot of other reasons the relationship worked where it might not have with anybody else. And that had to do with a funny combination, and it's hard to explain. The board president relied on me. He knew, as others did who tried it, that he could confide in me and it wouldn't go anyplace. It was maintained in a professional, confidential way, so that I had access to some of his deepest feelings. I'd gone through with him some very painful experiences that he had, and some doubts and uncertainties he could express with me. And he knew it was safe to do that. And I never utilized it in a other than a arm's length social distance. He encouraged me to be his personal friend, and I didn't do that. I was always aware that we were in a working relationship where I was the worker, he was the employer. When it came to program issues, I was the boss, not he. And when it came to agency integrity, I was there to protect it. So that, I don't know how you teach that. That's the other thing is, not everybody had my parents. They can't learn what went into whatever it is it made me as I am.
You had a wealth of experiences prior to coming here, too.
Yes, I did.
Between the league and the consultations and the agencies you were part of?
I've been director of other agencies before getting here. When I was here, I was director of 4 agencies simultaneously, and all of the odd things that went with that. So I had experience, and I felt very confident, and I had the function of age. It was very interesting. And that was really a problem for me in a way. Here I was at an age where I thought maybe I'm not marketable anymore. I'd been a big shot in a way, and here I was in my late 50s, early 60s, whatever it is. If I put up a squawk, a fight, if I walked away from it, where would I go? And the odd part is people kept calling. I was still, in a sense, in demand.
Well, you still are.
I wasn't, but I was aware of my limitations by then. So I felt, I don't have anything to lose, and yet I had a lot to lose. I didn't want to jeopardize what I built up. I loved the program, the people. It was a hot romance going on for a long time. And yet it took a lot of hanging in there and facing the music. But I felt I have to do what's right regardless of what may happen. So I held to that, and it worked. I know without admitting to it where I didn't do as well as I should have. And it bothered me. But if I had to do it over again, I'd probably do the same mistake. Because it's my nature to work that way. So,
want to talk about that?
I will. Maybe I can. I was asked, when I came to Vista, I had the most interesting pre-employment interviews I've ever had. I had to do 2 of them because it turned out that there was a lot of competition for the job. And I wasn't aware of that. In the second interview, someone who was very on the ball asked me the best question of the whole bunch, which was, of all the things you do, what do you do least well? It was done very nicely. It was, what do you see as your greatest weakness? And I knew what it was, and I know what it is, and it's the following. I'd said, because my training and experience has been largely as a therapist, and because of my upbringing, I am a firm believer in the capability of people to change and to grow and to develop. So I always tend to expect that people will improve in time. I said, and that is a problem for me in regard to working with the staff, because I find it difficult to give up when I realize they've reached the limit of their capability. I keep thinking maybe with some training, with some supervision, with some help, they'll grow more. And I tend, if anything, to stay with some longer than I should. When I realize that it's too long, I try to stop it. I try to put it to an end. And so I was then asked, well, how do you feel about firing people? I've done it. I know I will do it. That's contrary to my training again, because I was trained to be objective, to not assign blame or shame to people. And so I try to do it in as appropriate and gentle a way as possible. Now, I violated that here at Vista when I got close to people, when I went beyond a business relationship to a personal one. And the problem was, I was so impressed when I came to Vista. It was more like an intimate family than any place I'd ever worked. It had a quality of closeness that was so valuable. I so admired the staff who could share and participate and cared about each other. And as director, I wanted to be part of that, and yet I knew I could not. If I did that, I could not administer. Well, and that was in a way painful. It was by experience as an administrator, I always held myself apart. I didn't want to, but that was the nature of the job. When I did get close to people, sometimes it warped my judgment, and in some instances I went beyond what I should have for the good of the agency. In looking back, I know I might do it again. It didn't hurt anybody in the long run. It sometimes burdened me because I had to compensate for the gaps made in the program. If ever there was a time when anybody was detrimental to the program, I would have taken more assertive action. In one case, I almost did, but it was at the point of anger, and I don't like doing things when I'm angry, so I didn't act at that moment. By the time I cooled off, it was too late. But that was that business of self-exploring, by the way. I do have to go back over that. When I was a young executive, I worked at the Forest Park Children's Center, and I was very close with the psychiatric consultant, Dr. Conrad Summer. At the end of my stay, he asked me what I had learned on the job, and what I'd gotten from the experience. And I said, well, for one, I got a reasonably inexpensive analysis. And he asked me what I meant by that. I said, well, part of it was very serious. As therapists for the children, I really went through a very intensive self-examination. It was as though I were an analysis myself. I think I was a pretty fair therapist, and I was very immersed in all of the analytic material in those years. So I'd gotten that. Now, I did that professionally. Anything I did professionally, I looked at in the same analytic way. When I was at Edgewood Children's Center, I was a faculty supervisor for casework students and group work students. And I was the first administrator who was an administrative supervisor for an administrative student. And the way we did that was the student and I would spend, since he was in the group work sequence, in any group experience, whether staff, board, staff meeting, and whatever it was that involved a group of people, parents, community leaders, we'd always go back then and analyze what took place in that group thing. Well, I'd been doing that over the years. Anything I did, I looked at. A lot of self-examination, self-critical stuff. I don't know how you teach that. That's I love discussing it with other executives to get into how it goes. And among the executives, I was known as the happy warrior because I enjoyed being an administrator.
Doesn't this go back really to something very fundamental in casework one, in terms of know oneself? This
was part of. It also goes back way beyond that. When I was a kid, my parents taught me their values in just little sayings that they would throw out. Plus, I remember one difficult time when a friend of mine derided one of the people in our neighborhood. My parents said, unless you're in those person's shoes, you know what that person's going through. You mustn't ever, look badly on them, whatever it was. My brother used that term, know thyself, and gave me the whole speech. He was very good at that, my big brother. But that was part of it. It's funny, I was just thinking the other day, one of the times my father would get very annoyed with my mother was when people would come to the house from any place, be from the neighborhood or at a distance. My father would always insist that she offer them something to eat and to drink. Well, my mother was always thoughtful about the other person. She'd always say, would you like to have? And my father would always blow up. And the expression he would use is, a sick person you ask, a healthy person you give. And I didn't know what he meant. And later, as I got to understand my father more, he said, you're never going to put anybody in the position of having to ask for something. You always want to supply it, take care of their need before they let you know. And that worked when I worked for the Department of Welfare. It worked when I worked with staff members. It was a good lesson. That, and if I learned from anybody, was Irv Rosenwasser. I don't know if I ever mentioned his name. I worked for the Department of Welfare. I was always trying to learn. And there was one guy in our unit, I think we had 8 workers to a supervisor. And Irv Rosenwasser was an ordinary guy who, I don't know what his background was. 2 of us in the unit were going to night school to become social workers. He already had a family and wasn't really going anyplace. That was his job. Every day, Irv would come to work and he, somehow or other, communicated with everybody he saw. Before he sat down at his desk, he had talked to everybody there and in some way made a better day for them. And I thought, that guy knows how to communicate. When I went to Winter VA Hospital, Dr. Carl Menninger would parade down the long hallways, smiling at everybody, giving them a wave. And that was his message. In this hospital, when you see anybody, you smile. And that was me. It was a way of saying, if you're going to deal with people, deal with them in a positive way. I was always preoccupied, so I didn't always do it. But those were some of the impacts I had. And I don't know how you teach that to anybody. It's something that becomes part of you. And that ties in with a different style of executive. They're no two alike. We're all whatever we're made into.
What do you see as being the kinds of things that you brought to California that affected welfare in California?
Okay,
into some of your community?
Well, I had a thought process that went something like this. Every kid ought to be at home in a secure, happy family. That removing kids was not the way to go. That if you could get to them early enough, get to the family early enough, and work out whatever is troubling the family, you could maintain some kind of growth experience for all involved. That unhappiness was not a necessary way of life. So I thought, well, given an agency that will let me do that, I could try to bring that about. The other was, I always felt that there was no task that was insurmountable, or whatever the challenge, any reasonably intelligent person should be able to do. So I like challenges. I like to do things. I like program ideas. I like planning and then implementing. I didn't like the idea of so many scattered, uncoordinated, pieces of program that were unrelated to one another, that were out there floating around, each struggling. I thought there would be some interagency cooperative efforts. And as it turned out, not through my working toward doing it, but it fell into my lap. 3 agencies came our way, and I could prove that it was possible to coordinate, not to integrate necessarily, because I could not do that. I tried, but it didn't. It was beyond my. Maybe beyond anybody's. Okay. For a period of years. Yeah. Eventually, it might be workable. I had been director of a merged agency where the former director couldn't make the merger work. It was like 2 agencies running it simultaneously, and I'd made it into one. And here I thought, well, I could consolidate and get the benefit of the synergistic values. I hate to use lingo, but to get this mass together and that there'd be some benefit from it. And I think that I was able to. Through the state association, I think I got them more interested in standards, partly through the child welfare league kind of thing, and a reduction of animosity of public and private agencies, although that seems transitory. But I always felt one could work cooperatively. I wasn't a confrontational kind of person. Those are some of the things. I thought also that there was a way to work with boards that is a bit different. It's kind of offbeat. And again, I don't know that everybody could do it. Vice referred to it as the constructive use of guilt. And that is that the normal approach of publicizing one's virtues. We're a good agency, we do all these wonderful things. But that was good to do. You had to give people success stories. But I always felt, well, you have to rub in how much we're not doing. And at Vista, given its orientation, that was helpful. I got mileage with the board, and I got new programs developed by telling them what we were not doing and where we were failing, without blaming anybody. I think that led to some program development that might not otherwise have taken place. So those are things I like doing. But I didn't have any particular agenda when I came. So to run a successful program, be the best administrator I could be, get my brownie points.
You got your brownie points. What do you think about using some of these ideas and concepts in the general community of child welfare or agency interaction in the community?
Well, I noticed that in the advocacy approach, the constructive use of guilt has is blossoming. You pick up report after report where there's a rub-in of how many children are unserved, are abused, neglected, breakdowns in service, being shortchanged. So that's happening. But I don't know how much of it gets to the policymakers. It's that kind of approach. On the financing of services, there's some movement, but not enough. They still pay for what I call mattress money. They'll pay for days care in a facility rather than for the preventive stuff. Now, the new governor has spoken about preventive measures while cutting the budget of service.
Well, yeah, this I don't understand.
Yeah, and making regrettable remarks about mothers of dependent children and that part. So I don't know. Now what I've done, after retirement, I continue to do some consultation if they call me. I haven't really been working at getting a count, so to speak. But I do volunteer consultation through the Executive Service Corps. And I feel good about being able to take my administrative experience and putting it to work as a volunteer on behalf of agencies that are in need of some help. So that's pleasing. And that's what we're keeping my hand in and doing what I know how to do.
Would you ever get into policy making or politics?
No, not politics. No. Years ago, the closest I came, I was approached when I lived in Illinois. Somebody proposed my name for a board of education. And it was in an area where there's a certain amount of xenophobia, fear of the stranger. I'd been in the area for only a couple of years, and the committee that was screening raised questions about my newness and how, as social workers, there's a tendency to move in and out. They turned out they were right, though, because within a few years after that, I was off to St. Louis again. That question was, well, if you're doing so much with children now, how can would you want to do more of the same? It wouldn't be the same. That I was interested in doing that because that had an effect on kids, and that would have worked out. My newness, the fact that I wasn't a permanent person, that others were clamoring for, campaigning for, I didn't make it. That would have been interesting. I was on the board of a public treatment facility in St. Louis, county-run treatment center. It wasn't political. It was very heavily involved with politics. It was run by a cordon bank, and then I got to be I was on the advisory board, then the board. That was it. In terms of running for any office, no. I've worked on committees, commissions, but that's not the same thing. But that, politics is not. Plus, I'm not of an age when that would be possible, so that takes care of that. Yeah.
I don't accept that.
Yeah, I'm aware of it every once in a while.
Why did you decide to retire?
I had set a goal of what I wanted to accomplish with the agency. And I'd always said, there comes a time when you have to recognize it's time to move over and let somebody else come in with energy and ideas and vision. I was hoping that I could do whatever I had on my plate to accomplish. The other one was a highly personal one. I was rolling in pretty good gear, and then my brother passed away. He was my sort of like a second father to me. He was 10 years older than I. Birthday was yesterday, as a matter of fact. And that depleted me. It was we had a turnaround in his last years where I'd become the older, caretaking kind of brother. rather than he of me. And I know I must have been quite depressed without, I don't know how much it showed around the place, but I lacked the drive. I didn't have the fire engines anymore. There weren't any great exciting challenges. The other one, I got kind of satiated. There wasn't anything especially new or exciting for me to do. I had suggested to the board of directors one possible new thing to do that would have been exciting, a very difficult thing to do administratively, that I wanted to do, and it was not feasible. It was involved in another agency that I thought should be part of the umbrella of services here. And when I got when the word came in that it was not really doable, I thought, well, that's the last big thing for me to do. And then the job became boring. It was more, administration is basically doing the same things over and over again every year, unless there's something new to take care of. So I suggested a course of action, which was a long-term study that would yield some short-term goals or activities and would point the agency in a given direction, and then I would step aside. I felt that there had been over-dependency on the part of the agency, on me, and on the president of the board, that I was willing to step aside. I don't know if he was. I doubted that. But it was a way also of saying nobody's indispensable in your agency. It has to go and grow. And that I didn't know that I could do that much more here. I was tempted to stay another year. I thought about it. I was finding it hard to leave. You want to go? Do you want to? My ambiguity was heightened. And then in the process of the getting ready, the commitment to leaving was irreversible. I had to get the agency and myself emotionally ready for it. And although I'd given the board 3 years' notice, it didn't work that way because they chose to ignore it, like denying it. And it got increasingly difficult to continue. In fact, it went very slowly toward the end. And it was a very logical wrapping up of things. It was done so well. That sense of closeness and family was so meaningful. It was just a beautiful, timely way to die.
To die, oh gosh, that's the depression.
It just felt like the depression lifted after a while, but it still isn't gone. It's a very, it's strange. When I look back, I had left the Child Welfare League. I decided to leave the league not terribly long after my father died, but there wasn't the same linkage. There were some other very different things, but it was my brother. That was a bad one. Also, I'd always said that when I was on the league staff, I used to say, it's funny, I left administration to become a consultant. To be a good consultant, I ought to go back to administration so I keep up with what's new. If I can only come back. Well, now that I'm past administration, I'm
back to consulting.
And I find I like that. Again, and I can point to relevant experiences. But those, who knows why I do. Sometimes I did it because I couldn't think of anything better to do.
The goals that you had in mind, were they all for the agency or were they for child welfare in California?
Oh, general. Yeah, I wasn't as agency driven as that. I cared more about the overall scene. I wanted the agency to be the best possible, and in some ways it was. But no, I was thinking more of the general picture. For example, when we developed the aftercare program, which I saw as a major deficiency in the field, I had Judy Bernstein do as much as she could in terms of outside contacts to sell the idea of aftercare service. Not that our program was ever very large. Should have been, but there are some interesting internal wrinkle. No, I was thinking about what can you do to make the system better. I never was as immersed in some of the advocacy, the broad advocacy issues, other than as a participant but not a leader. I didn't, that was not quite my, I think I'm still basically a caseworker at heart, a one-to-one or a small group rather than the other. But no, my when I was working at I was painfully aware of whether I was depriving my own kids and my own family of my time and energy, because I was always, well, not always, but I was a workaholic for much of my career. I was very overly invested in it. And I remember when I was away, so much of the time, when I was at the League, I was on the road a great deal. I kind of defend myself by saying to my kids, you know where I was and what I was doing. And I'd explain to them that I was helping a lot of children, that every time I went away, it meant I helped hundreds and hundreds of kids. And I felt, you know, but am I shortchanging these little characters?
Did they ever tell you were?
No, they turn out to be terrific kids. So I know that was, the business of quality time, well, that was one thing. But I was lucky we had a good, close family, and still do. But that was, it was a sense of mission that you have a responsibility to others. That's one of those.
Is that something that you feel proud of in looking back over your career, that your sense of mission was accomplished? Or that your mission was accomplished?
I don't know if it was accomplished. I'm realistic enough to say whatever my efforts were, they're transitory. They don't last. Whatever effectiveness I may have had is over when I'm through with it. It doesn't last beyond a certain period of time. The field has worse problems than it had before. Problems are more severe. The help we gave to individual children and families, hopefully that will last, but I have no way of knowing for sure. The training gave to staff, the growth they may have experienced, that's good, that should go on. But I don't have any big illusions that I did anything monumentally large. Stuff I was always pleased when I did workshops. I go visiting, when I was on a consultation, people would approach me, they'd been in a workshop at Chapel Hill or at St. Lucie, wherever it was that I did some of this, and they remembered the wonderful class, whatever, or an article I may have written. But it's all part also of the training that says you don't look for credit. If it works well, your client thinks he did it himself, so that's fine. That's fair.
Well, if you gave them the wherewithal to do it.
Yeah, that's... No, the other one is, one administrator once told me, if you don't toot your horn, you remain untooted, which was in conflict with what my mother used to say, which is, translates to, don't praise yourself too much. You know, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do.
What do you think that the profession should be doing now?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think it's, I have to be careful how I say it to you in particular. I had been very involved with organizations, and NASW was one of them, and particularly when I was involved in the treatment end. Now, in many ways, the organizations are advocacy outfits, like the American Association of Children's Residential Centers changed from a clinical discussion group to an advocacy group, although they have excellent clinical meetings. But they're very much preoccupied with legislation and financing. NASW, over the years, became very involved with private practice, which is counter to my feeling about agency responsibility and accountability. But I have no brief against it, but that's just the way they are. Much of their work is in the area of advocacy, and I'm very pleased with that. And indirectly, that's an outlet for me. That's a way of saying, if I want to participate in advocacy, those are the places. I think that's terribly important. If we don't get good legislation and good financing of services, then I think we're in trouble. The other one is, I like the broadening of the base. I can remember when social work dealt, or child welfare dealt, with agency practice only, didn't get involved with issues like housing and jobs and civil rights. And that I think is the direction it should take. It should be the alert the conscience of the community. And I applaud that. On the private practice part, I see it as asserting social work as an equal partner in the triumvirate of psychology and psychiatry. So that doesn't perturb me. But I really don't know. I think there are areas that have been neglected. For example, I just finished 2 consultations in the field of AIDS. I don't know that social work has made as much impact there, but I was very pleased. I just got my copy of the journal, and it's all devoted to AIDS. So I think there's a catch-up. There's a catch-up. Yeah, it's good. That's good. I don't really know, Charlotte. When I was here, I tried so hard to get our staff to think beyond the agency, to think in terms of sectarian interests or community interests, and could have shot a gun. It wasn't there. And I think that may have been the mix of people, and that was one of the touchy areas around here, that I don't know why that was. That bothered me, that there was an insularity here. I don't know. I don't know if I could have found out. You went through the same thing. Some of us, I think and it's been said of you, and I think it's true of the field, there was a quality to the old line social worker that involved not a sense of private practice and money involvement, but of service to the community and a striving for excellence that was and a dedication that didn't know hours and didn't know role. It was kind of you get in and you do the job as your conscience tells you to do it. That I enjoyed so much. That was always, I don't know that maybe it's an age difference or something. I can't see it in some of the peers, some of the colleagues. And it could be that it's going on, but I'm not privy to it. But that always excited me. That was that group cared on a large scale. One of the staff people with whom I had such difficulties early on, when she left, I said, we may have agreed about the goals, but not by the methods to reach them. And although I didn't agree with her tactics, I always admired